Right, I've got recording. You should all see the record thing kind of pop up if it's there. Right, so thank you everybody for turning up. Hopefully some other people will drop in as well. Today, we're really lucky to have Dr. Kyriacou. Have I pronounced that correctly?
No,
I've
you
got it wrong,
haven't. It's fine, Anton. Don't worry.
yeah,
It's fine. It's Kyriacou, but just call me Docs.
I'm
It's
just
fine.
rubbish.
It's
Yeah, I've
fine.
known you for well over a decade and a bit, and I've just been getting your surname wrong. So I apologize.
No problem.
But luckily, we do have you here to present some of your research to the rest of us. Thank you so much. And as I say, we're recording this. When we've done with your piece, I'll stop it and we'll go on to our discussion section and see where it takes us as usual.
No.
Round of applause, everybody. Thank you, Docs, for
No, not necessary. Let me try and start to share first of all, and then I'll just give a little bit of background. Let's just see. Let's just go to the top. Can everybody see this? Can everybody see the title page? Yeah. Okay. So just to let you know a little bit about myself. I've been in academia now for about 24 years. I studied accounting and finance. Then I moved on and did a master's in communication. And then I did a PhD in looking at gender and ethnicity issues in the UK accounting profession. But what I found was when I was like doing my master's, basically became really interested in the ethnicity and gender aspect, in the sense of how people were being represented in the media, especially in adverts, especially in films. And I thought to myself, I began this kind of period of long reflection and introspection. Well, what about me? What about my identity? Who am I? And, you know, up to that point, I suppose, I kind of thought, you know, that my identity, I was really white, what I would call white. But it soon became apparent to me that actually I wasn't white in the conventional sense, in the kind of categorizing my identity as white. And I was thinking, well, actually, I'm a British born Greek Cypriot. So where are people like myself being represented? And I started sort of thinking about identity, and then I moved on and did a PhD about, you know, gender and ethnicity issues in the UK accounting profession. But this idea of who I was and how people like myself, being Greek Cypriot and indeed other ethnicities, were being represented in the UK accounting profession started me on this journey. And so I decided that actually what I wanted to do for my PhD was actually look at the experiences of African women accountants who were either in the profession or who were either trying to get into the profession and were not successful, or those who had been in the profession and had left for various reasons. So those were the people that I looked at for my PhD. But also when I wrote my PhD, it was actually interspersed with layers of my own history and how I came to be who I was within, you know, being an accounting academic, but also looking at my own issues of identity and invisibility and visibility as well. So that was really my PhD. So I spent, you know, the last 22 years teaching straight accounting, teaching you know, accounting through sociological lenses. And to be totally honest, when COVID struck, I thought, I don't really want to do this anymore. And I was thinking, okay, really, what do I want to do? Don't really want to teach accounting anymore. I'm a little bit bored of that, but I like the research side of things. And then I had an opportunity to move over to another small group in the Middlesex Business School, which was basically supervising professional doctorate students through a transdisciplinary lens. And that's really what I've been doing for the last 2 years. So my main work as an academic involves supervising practitioners, whether they are maybe accountants, financial managers. I'm supervising somebody who's an engineer in Hong Kong. I'm supervising somebody who is a manager in a private hospital in Saudi, etc., etc. So all my PhD candidates, they're very wide. So that's really what I'm doing now. So just really wanted to sort of give you a bit of background about myself. And excuse me if my voice goes, I've just been recovering from COVID. So if my voice breaks, I'm really sorry. So what I wanted to present to you today and really just bring here is to have a conversation with you about a piece of research that a few of us, actually it was mainly myself and Jonathan Ashton Lamptey, who is a great friend of this group. And we met each other about, I would say about, I mean, I'm sure Jonathan would say I'm wrong. It was more or less maybe 13, 14 years ago. And, you know, Jonathan started his PhD many years ago, and he came to see me to discuss the possibility of doing a PhD. And we had some various conversations, and it was fantastic to meet Jonathan. And through the conversations with Jonathan, this is how this research project came to be. It's still not finished. It's actually a massive project. And one of the reasons why I wanted to present this to you today is to basically seek your help. So this project is about exploring representations of gender and ethnicity in Accountancy magazine. So I don't know if you're aware, but Accountancy magazine used to be one of the sort of major mouthpieces of the ICAW, that's the Chartered Institute of Professional Accountants, and this is one of the old, you know, magazine copies. So just really wanted to let you have an idea of the outline for this evening. So I want to talk to you about how the idea was conceived, background to UK accountancy, connecting with some aspects of the literature, some research objectives, methodology, our big data collection and analysis. Wanted to present some preliminary findings to you of stage 1. We've got another couple of stages to go with this, and possibly next step seeking your help. So how did the idea really start? It started with Jonathan when he came to see me, and he was saying something to me along the lines of, well, docs, I'm from Ghana. Where are people like me depicted in the accounting profession? So we were having this conversation, and on my desk, literally, I had a couple of these accountancy magazines. And I said to him, Jonathan, let's just have a look if they're depicted in the magazine. So we went through, pulled out a few, and literally at that time, we could just count, you know, people from an ethnic background on one hand. And we thought that was really strange, to say the least. So we kind of developed this idea of, okay, could we actually get access to a number of accountancy magazine issues and do an analysis of them? But then the big question was, where do we start and where do we finish? And how do we do this in terms of consistency? So just to give you a little bit of background and then moving forwards as to how we went about approaching this. So for those of you who you know, I'm sure you're aware in terms of looking at accountancy. In the last sort of 30, maybe 35 years, there's been a lot of research within the accounting literature domain with regards to looking at accountancy as some form of occupational group. So there's a lot of studies which say, yeah, you know, accounting is a professional, you know, it's a profession. Others saying, well, actually, it might not be a profession because it, you know, you have to look at, you know, some aspects of traits. You can look at, you know, the Weberian approach or the Marxist approach to kind of delineate whether accountancy is a profession. There's so much research on this, you know, the work of Abbott, systems as a, you know, systems of professions, etc., etc. So we thought actually to kind of try and place this type of project, we would obviously have to look at, you know, the literature on accountancy. Obviously, from the UK point of view, there's a specific sort of makeup of the profession. It's a fragmented profession across 6 bodies, but they all come together as one profession. And also, there's this notion of some form of comprehensive socialization where, you know, there's sort of rituals in terms of qualifying, getting the badge of ability as an accountant and, you know, passing exams and going through training, etc. So each particular body has their own form of, you know, getting qualified as such. So we then sort of thought, okay, how does this idea that we're thinking about, how does it connect with other literature? So we identified a number of literatures. Of course, there's the literature on the profession literature, but there's also the literature which basically looks at the institutional structures of UK accountancy. So the work of Kirkham and Loft, who suggests that accountancy is really dominated by white males. So that looks at the institutional historic structures of UK accounting. One of my papers from my PhD, I looked at the experiences of quote unquote African Black men and sort of looked to see how were they experiencing UK accounting. And the outcome of this particular piece of research, we found that there were difficulties which appear to be experienced by those who are not part of the dominant group. So there was aspects of surveillance going on at a kind of, on one hand, it was very covert, on the other, it was very overt. So there was aspects of sort of like Foucauldian surveillance going on there. And then from my PhD many, many years ago, this idea of the African women were negotiating visibility and invisibility, and that's how they were able to kind of get ahead within their accountancy workplace. So we thought, okay, we can sort of build on some of this prior studies, we can build on the professional literature as well. But then it wasn't just a question for us, okay, we're going to analyze, the photos as such in these magazines. But then we thought, okay, if we do that, so what? What's the outcome? Are we just going to be really looking at numbers? Obviously, that might be the first stage, and indeed it was. But then moving forwards, what is it actually that we're trying to do? What's the whole point of this? So looking around at the time, we identified that there was a number of significant reports which were, coming out, and shall we say, let's call them critical events. So one of them was the Milburn report, which came out in 2009. It explored issues of social mobility in UK professions. There was the introduction of the Equality Act 2010. There was the Davis report that came out between 2011 to 2015, which focused on offering recommendations to address gender imbalance on FTSE 350 companies. There was a Modern Slavery Act, which obviously there's a lot of research going on about this at the moment within accountancy. There was a Parker Review 2016 on ethnic diversity of UK boards, and the McGregor-Smith 2017 report on race in the workplace. So what we thought was, once we've inputted all this data that we've got, then we could hopefully try and look at what we call these critical incidences, and to see whether there's been any kind of increase in the number of photos of, let's say, representations of gender and ethnicity either side of those critical events. And have they increased? Have they decreased? What's going on? But we also wanted to get down to the kind of real fine analysis, and that's really our main goal at the end of the day moving forwards. So what we tried to do was, we thought, okay, how are we going to do this? Because most of these magazines have an online presence, but we thought we can't do that, because even if you look at maybe one of the news sites like BBC News in London, every couple of hours it changes, it's not static in any way. So we thought we're going to really find some difficulties here. So that's why we went for, let's say, the hard copy print media, because that way, for consistency purposes, for checking, we could always go back and sort of double check what we were, inputting. And we also decided that actually this particular, publication, the ICAW magazine, was sent to 114,000 qualified accountants every month, and it's the largest membership in the UK. And the next largest body was ACCA at 68,000 qualified members. So we also thought, okay, if we don't do this one, what's the alternative? There was Accountancy Age with 65,000 subscribers, and this was by request only, and it was no longer in print. So what we decided to do, we started this work round about 2011. Okay, and if you go back to the previous slide, you can see the reason why we picked 2011 was that was the kind of rough period that we decided, yeah, we're going to do this study. But what we also decided was, if we just go back to the previous slide, you'll see that one of our first critical events was around about 2009. And there's a reason why we did this. So I'll just explain in a moment. And also what we did was we looked at Accountancy magazine from round about July 2008 to roughly, I think it was January 2012, where Accountancy magazine finished. And then it was replaced by the ICAW, by their new magazine called Economia. And this went from February 2012 to January 2020. So what we have is we've got an entire, not just sample the entire population of magazines. So what I want to do, I just want to stop sharing because I want to share a different file with you. Okay, let me just see if I can do this let me just see if I can get access. Let me just get out of full screen and I'd like to show you, okay. If I can bring it up. Nope. Okay, because it's on my desktop. I just want to try and get access to my desktop. There's so many bits of screen on here. Okay, let me see if I can find it. Okay, browse. Here we go. Okay, I think you'll find this really interesting. Just going to go back to share with you. Okay, sorry about that interlude, guys. Okay, can you see this file here that we've got? Yeah. Okay, so what I wanted to show you was the enormity of this data collection, and we still got a lot of stuff to do. So we basically, it's 2 pages here. So we started our Accountancy magazine data input for the July 2008 edition. So we've inputted 6 issues for 2008. We did all of 2009, we did all of 2010, and we did basically 7 for 2011. Now you're going to ask me, well, what have you actually inputted? What have you done? So what we did was we went through every single photo in every single magazine, and we documented on an Excel spreadsheet the photo and what we saw, and obviously if it was a person, an item, an animal, etc. So we documented every single photo, including the classifieds at the end. And I can share with you perhaps at the end the Excel spreadsheet so you get an idea of what we did. So we inputted 37 of these Accountancy magazine issues, and then that was stage 1. So we're now on stage 2, and we still have to input these remaining ones for 2011. And if I go to this sheet here, right here, we have got these here to import. So you can see we've got Economia magazine started in February 2012. So the last edition of Accountancy magazine was January 2012. So we now have access, we physically have in our hands all of these editions of Economia magazine. So we have the whole population. And trust me, it was a really difficult thing to get every single issue. We went back to the publishers, they were saying, sorry, we don't own the rights anymore, we've sold it on, and we couldn't get access to them. So some of these we had to beg, borrow, and steal from colleagues at university, from other colleagues overseas. So basically we have the whole population. And the last edition of the Economia magazine was December 2020. So some might ask, well, why are you going to stop there? Why don't you now go and maybe analyze their new magazine, which is Insights? Well, I would argue, number one, Insights, as far as I understand, it's only web-based. And because we just want to deal in hard copy, we're not going to do that. But also, COVID came on board in, 2020. So we thought, okay, that would be a good reasoning, but then you might disagree with me and say, well, Black Lives Matter also came along, so why don't you extend your study to incorporate that? But I suppose we've got to stop somewhere. So I'm just going to stop sharing this for a moment and go back to the PowerPoint slide. So just bear with me, please. Okay, I'm just going to go back to where we were. Okay, so let's share again. Okay, can you see the PowerPoint slides? Yeah? Yep, okay, great. So let's go to the slideshow. Okay, so that really just explains to you, you know, the additions. So moving towards also, again, trying to place this within, you know, we said there was a number of theoretical literature fields that we wanted to sort of build upon and sort of extend. And we found that there was growing interest in representations of accountants in various media. So as we know, the very famous work by Beard, 1994, I myself looked at websites, the work of Duff, looked at annual reports, Jekyll training manuals, and also over the last, let's say, 8 years or so, we've seen the emergent work of Jane Davidson and Sam Warren on accounting for the visual. And so we can sort of see that there is a growing interest in looking at images and what they could actually offer us in terms of an understanding of how possibly professionalism, you know, is depicted and actually is working within, you know, in terms of communication to the outside, you know, the outside communities, because the way that we're seeing it is that these magazines are produced by parts of the profession for their readership. So at one level, you might argue that they might like to mirror to the outside world aspects of their own in-house membership. So you might say, are these magazines functioning as a mirror? Are they actually reflecting what's going on in society? Or is the function of these something else? Is it just simply a communication medium? So we just thought that these issues were really interesting and obviously something that we wanted to look into. So one of our research objectives was we wanted to explore one of the ways in which the profession communicates with itself outside of the workplace. And we wanted to attempt to observe and explore any impact of recent events such as legislation and those highlighted, you know, reports that I mentioned on one of the previous slides, key government reports on the profession as depicted in the pages of Accountancy. And we also wanted to explore the differences between those critical incidences either side of the window. And also we thought, okay, well, it's not enough just, you know, just counting, if you like, you know, the number of images, you know, how many, you know, times was a particular image displayed, or, you know, whether there was repetition across different issues. That we just thought that wasn't enough, because what we wanted to try and get a handle on, or some understanding of, is there any notion of change being depicted within these magazines? So this notion of society can change, there is transformation going on in society, and how is this actually happening? So we thought that perhaps if we were to frame it within the methodological lens of critical realism, this might give us an opportunity to get an understanding of that. And we thought that some of these critical events, those reports that I mentioned earlier, those reports that were published, they could be really the catalyst for change. And we also thought that there could be some emancipatory potential, which acknowledges some notion of social change over time. So as we can see from the reports, there is notions of social change, that society has to change and acknowledge certain issues like, you know, ethnic diversity, race, etc. But we thought, how is this going to happen? And is it happening within the pages of these magazines, which are produced by one component of the profession, or one body of the profession. So some of our really basic research questions for stage 1 were: are women represented in the images of accountancy magazines? Are they there? Secondly, are women represented as accountants in the images of accountancy magazines? So really just some basic questions. Are minority ethnic groups represented in the images of accountancy magazines? And number 4, are minority ethnic groups represented as accountants in the images of accountancy magazines? So it's all very well having women, having ethnic groups there, but are they depicted as accountants? Because one would expect this is an accountants magazine. We would expect to see images of accountants. And number 5, which this is a little bit more tricky, and this is moving forwards for stage 2, is there an association between the representations of women and minority ethnic groups and critical events, such as, for example, taking the Milburn Report, which was 2009, and the Equality Act 2010. So just really some basic questions. So in our stage 1, as I showed you in the kind of word file, we inputted every single photo which was displayed in the 37 issues going from July 08 to July 2011. And we inputted them in an Excel spreadsheet. I can share that with you at the end of the presentation so you get an idea of what we did. So basically we had one sheet which represented one of these magazines, and we went through every single page, documented everything that we saw to then enable us to do some kind of searches on that data set. So we use labels in order to code our data, which was informed by those research questions. We put it all in Excel. And of course, the big thing is a lot of judgment was required. So in terms of the image that we saw and how could we classify it. So the data inputting was really just done by myself and Jonathan Lamptey. And this is where we are asking for your help. If anybody is interested, we'll talk about that towards the end in terms of next steps. So what we did was we took down notions of the month of the magazine, the page number, whether we saw a person being depicted or a non-person, maybe it was like, a table or something like that, an inanimate object, the ethnic background of people who were presented in the photographs. And of course, this is all very subjective and we've just used these labels. They're not politically correct, but that wasn't really what we were thinking of at that time. Of course, we can play about with these labels, but we just wanted to kind of find a way of having some discrete separation. So Black, white, Asian, mixed ethnicity. What we mean by mixed ethnicity was if we had a picture, group picture, and there was different ethnicities and mixed ethnicities being represented, then we wanted to basically make a note of, yes, it was not just one ethnicity being depicted in a group photo. There was a range of ethnicities being depicted. We wanted to look at the gender of the main character, if there was one central character in a photo. So we tried to kind of get an idea or a handle of that as well. And what we mean by unisex here was there was instances where we might have had like some kind of cartoon little figure, and we didn't know whether there was supposed to be a male or a female, so we called that unisex. And of course, there was animals there as well. So you can see there was a lot of judgment. There was a lot of toing and froing between me and Jonathan. Are we being consistent here? How are we doing this? We obviously did a random spot checks, according to lines of Excel, and we, discussed what we found in terms of consistency. Again, we looked at the adverts as well. Was it an advert? Yes, no. What part of the magazine was the image found? Was it in the cover? Was it in the content? Was it in the classifieds? What is the status of the person being depicted? So we were interested in, were they an accountant? Were they an authority person? What we mean by authority was somebody famous in the profession. So somebody who was an authority maybe on IFRS or taxation, etc. And was this a non-person? So was it like, an object of some kind? Or was their depiction in the position of other, maybe a waiter or a manager or something else. So that's what we termed by other. So just to give you some notion of rough analysis, so image by type. So there was 45% of images being displayed of non-people, so objects, and 55% being of people. People by gender. This was quite interesting. So 59% of the images across 3 years were male images. Female images constituted 21%, where there was, a picture with mixed genders in maybe group photos, 13%. Unisex, where it could have been either male or female, we weren't sure, 7%. So we thought that was quite interesting. So we can see possibly a replication here of the male institutional structures of accountancy being depicted, within the pages of these magazines. We then moved on to look at people by ethnicity. So we can see here very clearly 78% were white, okay? And then what we can see here is 7% were different ethnicities. The next one here, 5 was, let me just see, unknown. We weren't sure. So we did have an unknown category as well. And 3% here, we had animation arts. So, just some sort of like characters. And you can see here, black was roughly 2%. So we thought that was quite telling. So 78% were images, photographs of white people within the accountancy magazine issues. Now here, what we've got is gender by ethnicity. So within the female category, we can see that white women were very much depicted in almost, well, every single category here. And we thought, again, that was really quite interesting when we looked at the breakdown here, because the predominant, images that we could see were white people. But you can see here, if we just take this one here, for example, the blue one here represents South Asian women. So that would have been the next one after white women. So again, we just thought this was really interesting, sort of in terms of a breakdown. We looked at gender by minority ethnic groups. So for example, if we, again, just take the female category for argument's sake here, what we've got is 5.1% being in the South Asian group, then followed by East Asian women, followed by mixed ethnicity, followed by Black, followed by Arabic. So we were trying to sort of understand what was going on here, but what was really prevalent, that when we tried to look at the minority ethnic groups, that the South Asians were quite, they were depicted within the pages of Accountancy magazine, and followed by East Asian. Now we thought that was really interesting. And then we looked at gender by status, and this was quite telling. So what we found, as one would expect, we expected to find images of people who are represented as accountants, right? Because this is an accountancy magazine. So what we found was, in the female category, the most prevalent one was where females were depicted as accountants, then as authority figures. So we might have had a woman on an editorial spreadsheet, editorial thing talking about, taxation or whatever. And we then had females depicted as other. So maybe as, I don't know, as, don't want to be stereotypical, but it could have been a waitress, it could have been a secretary, it could have been whatever. So that's what we meant by other here. We look at the male category. Males were more likely here to be depicted as authority figure, then as an accountant, then as other. And then the mixed gender category, where we had photos of mixed genders within the photograph. We had other being the most prevalent, followed by accountant, followed by authority. And then again, this just gives a little bit more sort of breakdown of some of this, but I think the story here is quite revealing, really. So there is a lot of depiction of accountants, as one would expect. There is some depiction of authority for some minority ethnic groups, but there was one outlier in here where there was consistently in a number of issues, I forget his name, but there was one Asian gentleman, sorry, not an Asian gentleman, a Chinese gentleman who was an authority, I think, on taxation, and he had an editorial spread every single month. So we thought that maybe we can strip that back, maybe remove it as possibly an outlier of some description. So really, what did we find? So for research question number 1, are women represented in the images of Accountancy magazine? Yes, around about 21%, less than in real life accountancy, which this figure straddles between 29 to 33%. Are women represented as accountants in the images of Accountancy magazine? Yes, they're more likely to be authority figures than accountants or other. Are minority ethnic figures represented in the images of Accountancy magazine? Yes, Asians are better represented than any other minority ethnic group. They're more likely to be female than Black, more likely to be male. Are minority ethnic groups represented as accountants in the images of Accountancy magazine? Yes, Arabic people more likely to be accountants, followed by Asians. Orientals, people more likely to be an authority. Blacks equal chance of being an accountant and an authority. And is there an association between representation of women and minority ethnic groups and critical events? Well, we have really insufficient data so far to confirm because we haven't inputted the whole data set, and it would be wrong for us to try and come up with an answer conclusion for this because we simply don't know, we haven't finished. So what we also found was that during the time that we looked at Accountancy magazine, there was 3 editors during that period and they were all women. So you might say, well, was there a conscious decision by these women to try and maybe depict more women in the pages of these of this magazine? The magazine format was also changed during the period from more guest writers, authorities, and we had less pages. So it went from 144 to 128 pages for every single issue. Average number of images have fallen between 2008 to 2010. And so far we'd analyzed more than 5,000 pages, in total 6,600 images. So the next steps for us, what do we need to do as a research team? Well, we need to try and input all that data, so the few remaining Accountancy magazine issues and all the economy population straddling about 9 to 10 years. And we have all of them. And so what do we have? We've inputted 37 issues and there's 93 issues which need to be inputted. So essentially ones that look like this, and they're in the region of about 99 pages. And if we include the front cover and the back cover, about 101 pages. So my question, and I'm throwing this out to everybody, is anybody interested in coming on board to help us? And what we were thinking of, well, as I kind of mentioned previously in one of these sessions, we have tried to get, funding from one of the accountancy bodies. They seem to be really interested at the beginning. And then unfortunately, they came back saying, yeah, we're always really interested in diversity issues, but unfortunately we can't help. So as you can see at the moment, we've got 5 authors on the paper. So me and Jonathan, we did the 37 inputting of those issues. So Sylvia, who's one of my other colleagues from Middlesex University, she's an expert on econometrics. So she's going to be doing all that wonderful stats between the critical events, etc. And we've got Christina, and she is somebody who's just recently come on board. She's going to help us input some of those data issues with us, the economia issues. She is currently at Aston University. And then there's my dear friend George Kapaya, who will again be helping us with some of the inputting of issues, but also helping us later on maybe develop some of the theory as well. So what is it that we are kind of thinking of? I just want to also, maybe I just missed one of, yes, if I just want to go back and double share again, if I can. I kind of thought I'd come to the end of my slides. So I just want to fill you in on the last slide. Okay, so moving forwards, next steps. So once all our data has been inputted, what are we trying to do? Then we can see what is happening in terms of representation. So we want to explore those critical incidences in terms of what has happened to the images at the side of the incident. Have they increased? Have they decreased? Have there been any differences? Measuring the impact of the incidences on the representations. And then what do we want to do? So we're thinking of our main methodological framework is critical realism, but then on top of that, to have some possibly Foucauldian analysis of the gaze. So the gaze could work in various ways. So the gaze of maybe us, the authors, the data inputters, gazing, looking into the magazines. What is it that we are seeing filtering through our interpretations? And also, how does the gaze work? Because this, if you like, is almost a kind of mirror, possibly, of the profession, or one of the bodies of the profession, to their outside readership. So we were thinking maybe some kind of Foucauldian analysis. And actually, if we reverse this, we're doing surveillance on one part of the profession, for want of a better way of explaining it. So we're really interested in looking at, has there been transformation over time? Have we seen more images of ethnic people within these pages? And if they have, how does this then possibly translate into real numbers, if we can get access to real numbers as far as they exist? Because we know the profession over the years has not really been forthcoming on statistics on the ethnic background of their membership. We know they've got some stats on, women and gender aspects, but they don't really have a lot about the ethnic background of their membership. So really, that's where we are with this. We started it many, many years ago. And over the years, we've kind of stopped, we started, we left it there. We've obviously got on with other research projects. So I just wanted to sort of use this forum today just to put something on the table. If anybody is willing to come on board with us, happy to have you. If anybody has any interest, if you want to discuss anything, please, I'm all ears. But, it really came out of an idea that me and Jonathan were just having like this conversation about, where am I depicted, in the pages of this and these kind of magazines? So then we looked, and then we thought, not very many photos of ethnic people. And why is that? So it was really our curiosity that got us going. So in some way, we're trying to, come to a conclusion with regards to what is actually going on here. That's it.